days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you, join me here for a little bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King. That's right, a show that I do twice every week here on The Horror Show, every Terrifying Tuesday, every Scarific Saturday, unless we have a big bit of content besides that, like a trailer that's dropped or something that needs some imperative coverage. So sometimes this show gets shifted to a Wednesday or sometimes to a Sunday, but usually, if we're keeping the course proper, you get 2 episodes a week, Tuesday and Saturday from me. Gracias very much for joining me here. Once again, you can call me Fuego. And you know, I have seen a recent trend, especially for anybody who frequents the Killer Flicks big Facebook group that I'm a huge fan of, headed up by Lee from Drum Dums, which is a great horror YouTube channel that I recommend all of you check out and subscribe to, and also Jason from Sinister Cinema. They're 2 of the admins on there, but it's a fun group, and I've gotten acquainted with a lot of different just fellow YouTube horror coverage peeps on there, and I have noticed that big trend right now as far as getting genuine views is that people love ranking videos, and we don't really do a ton of ranking videos here on The Horror Show. However, I am about to change that here on Hail to Stephen King. I was sitting brainstorming ideas for a bunch of new episodes. This is the 76th episode of Hail to Stephen King. As you can see by all the books beside me, he is my favorite author. I've read all of his work, short stories, novellas, you name it. I finally took about 8 years, and it was a lengthy journey that I finally completed last year, but here in just a little over a week, we are going to have a new entry to sink our teeth into, which is The Outsider. May 22nd that arrives. But to cut to the chase, I am going to do some ranking videos here on Hail to Stephen King, and I have a lot of different ideas. If you have some that you think would be cool for me to do, please let me know. But I think that there is no better to start with than King's magnum opus. This is yours truly ranking the Dark Tower novels. Now, when I say the Dark Tower novels, unfortunately, I have to start with an honorable mention, which is The Little Sisters of Eluria, which was initially released as a standalone in a limited edition, and I am still, it is one of the white whales in my Stephen King collection. You can see I've got so much badass Cemetery Dance stuff from their anniversary edition of It to the first 3 of his Doubleday years there. I'm very excited to have my night shift delivered to me, as well as lots of others like The Secretary of Dreams. If you have not checked out Cemetery Dance, please do. I always sing the praises of Richard and Blue and all the guys over there. But yeah, so that is one of my elusive white whales, is that standalone release of The Little Sisters of Eluria. It's also available in Everything's Eventual, and Marvel actually did a pretty damn good comic adaptation of it, I have to make mention. But since it's just like a novella, like a slightly larger short story, it's like around 40, 50 pages, I think, something like that. But that is a tremendous little young Roland side story where he's basically walking through the ruins of the pavilion that you see and have described in The Talisman, because The Talisman and the Dark Tower pretty much take place in the same world, or so we are led to believe. Same with Eyes of the Dragon. But yeah, Roland is kind of taken into custody by these weird, like, vampiric nuns of sort, and he discovers the only woman that he loves besides, Ms. Delgado in this particular story. But since it is of that length and it's not one of his full novels, I did not include that here in the ranking list, but I have to just sing the praises of that story. I love it. It's one of those tragically sad but beautiful in the same way type of stories. So I have to give a shout out to that story. So I'm going to go through the 8 novels now, going from least favorite all the way up to my absolute favorite of the Dark Tower stories. And if you have a ranking, I really, really want to hear it in the comments below, guys. I know that there are a lot of people who haven't read all of these books yet, so I'm going to do my damnedest to keep the spoilers at a minimum here. But yes, there are technically 8 Dark Tower novels, because there is, as King has described it himself, novel 4.5, which is the one through the Keyhole. So that is not my least favorite, though. My least favorite of the Dark Tower series is Song of Susanna, coming in at number 8. Now, Song of Susanna is one that I have so much trouble with because, even though 4.5 was an in-between book, it had so much of its own flavor and identity, whereas Song of Susanna felt very much like a bridging book. It was really just an entry that felt like massive preamble to the final book. You know, it's a lot of necessary plot shifting that had to transpire, but nonetheless, it's one of the shortest entries. I believe it's the shortest one with the exception of the very first book. And, you know, we basically pick up right after where 5 left off, and this is technically book 6, just to let everybody know. But yeah, so you know, they have left you know, Caliburn Sturgis, and they're after Susanna, I should say, to specify. I don't want to get those two confused, being as vastly different as they are. But yeah, you know, Susanna, you know, Eddie's wife, is on the run, and she's got this alternate demonic like personality possession thing going down named Mia, who is a fully taken control of her, and she's jumped through Doorway Cave, and she is in 1999 New York, and she's trying to, you know, get to this place where she can have her chap, and you know, which is basically like the demon spawn Antichrist kind of thing, without going into too much detail. And so the thing that I really also have a big issue with this book is what they do with Roland and Eddie, how they send them to the 1970s to basically go hang out with Stephen King. And that is still one of my biggest problems that I have with the Dark Tower series as a whole, is that post-accident King decided to put himself in his book. Now, I know that his thing that he was trying to go for is that in all of the infinite realities in the Stephen King multiverse, there is in fact our real world right here that we live in. And so, you know, we don't necessarily know if that is the, you know, if the version that Roland and Eddie are even in necessarily. We get some hints as to which one it might be. We don't even know if that's like the real world, which has its own classification in the Dark Tower mythology and whatnot. But I just didn't like when it got that meta. I guess it served its purpose to some degree, but, you know, in its entirety, I don't know. And the whole, you know, getting to, you know, the Dixie Pig and the showdown there, you know, with the Tahine and the vampires and all that stuff, it's all okay. You know, it's decent enough. But, you know, the one thing that I will give this book super amounts of credit for is I like the, you know, Kamala come little, like, preamble stanzas, I should say, that they give at the beginning of each chapter. I thought that that was some interesting framing. But as a whole, yeah, without spoiling really too much, as I said, book 6, Song of Susanna, is coming in at number 8, and it's my least favorite of the Dark Tower series. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad and doesn't have redeeming qualities and whatnot, but nonetheless, it is my least favorite of the series. So, as we jump into number 7 here, I am going to The Dark Tower, Book 7, The Dark Tower. Yeah, the 7th edition of The Dark Tower, the big grand finale, and all 800 plus monstrous pages of it. It's a very bloated book, and I don't necessarily know how you can really, like, how do you end a series as epic as this one without just going all out, balls deep crazy with it? And there's a lot to wrap your head around here, you know, from the little hints that we got about the Breakers in the Black House book, which was the sequel to the Talisman, and we see some interesting faces show up once, you know, we get once you get to Thunderclap, you know, in End World, basically, you know, and it's nice to see characters, like, I actually really like Dinky, you know, from Everything's Eventual, the story, which is the namesake of that collection and stuff. He's there as a breaker. Sheeny from Book 4 is there as a grown-up breaker and stuff like that, and they're basically using their psychic powers to break these beams that are holding the tower up. So all of these alternate existences and realities and stuff. Basically, if the tower falls from all of these beams being broken, everything, not just our reality, everything is destroyed, and it's just mass chaos destruction and stuff. But once again, the book really drags in the middle, and especially like the third portion as we're getting close to the end. I don't know. So the fate of certain characters, I just didn't think was done with as much resonance as it really needed. I think there's only one in particular that I felt really was earned and stuff, and I personally hate the stuff with Mordred. I do not like. Also, Flag is a character that was disserved for just the way he is like the biggest, most amazing bad aside from the Crimson King until we learned about him, you know. But it just, once again, it's nearly impossible to finish a series like this and make it satisfying. There's a big battle in Dever Toy, if I remember correctly. Basically, the outpost in Thunderclap where all these psychic peeps are trying to break the beams and whatnot. But I don't know. there's some sad moments for sure, but I felt like just the villains especially were given a massive disservice in this. And the Crimson King turns out to be this raving, silly madman of goofy ridiculousness. And I will say the book earned my respect with the very, very, very end, you know, and getting back to a very familiar line from the very first book. Ka is a wheel, my friends. Ka is a wheel, damn it. But yeah, coming in at number 7 here, my second least favorite of the Dark Tower series is in fact Book 7, The Dark Tower. So now is where I'm going to ruffle some feathers as I start jumping through the rest of these. So coming in at number 6 is Book 2, The Drawing of the Three. I know a lot of people that put this book in their top 3 in the Dark Tower series. Not for me, man. Honestly, when they first jumped in to, you know, like New York, basically, it didn't matter what time period it was, I had serious reservations with this. I'm like, what are they doing going from this post-apocalyptic, like so much time has gone by that we've gone back to like a hybrid of the Old West and like medieval times, like mush those two together, which I thought was so badass. And that's still some of my absolute favorite stuff in Midworld, in the Dark Tower series in its entirety, is the stuff in Midworld. It's really my personal favorite stuff, which is why I love young Roland so much. But yeah, Drawing of the Three, the stuff with, you know, Eddie is an interesting character, but he is a little annoying at first for me, you know, when he's coming off the heroin and whatnot. And, you know, I do find the backstory of Susanna compelling, but, I mean, the stuff with Jack Moore didn't really do much for me. Stuff with Balazar, even when they brought him back in his henchmen and stuff in Book 6, Song of Susanna, didn't really do much for me. I guess the Lobstrosities are okay. There's some messed up stuff that happens, you know, when the scene with Eddie running around butt-ass naked shooting mobsters is pretty funny. But I don't know, this is one that just never really worked for me on the level that it did for a lot of other people. I know a lot of people dig the body jumping aspect after going through the doors, and the drawing aspect of getting his new quartet together, you know, after we know the fate of, you know, Jaime and Elaine and Bert and stuff like that. But this is one that, you know, this felt once again more like preamble for what inevitably became my favorite era of the Stephen King Dark Tower series. So yeah, Drawing of the Three, Book 2, that comes in at number 6 as my third least favorite. And I'm gonna probably shy away from using that description now. But so let's jump into number 5, guys. Number 5 is Book 1, The Gunslinger. Now this is one that I wrestled with massively because immediately I knew what my top 3 were gonna be, and immediately I knew what my bottom 2 were gonna be. But it was really just trying to decide where I was going to place these two. But in the end, I went with, you know, The Gunslinger, Book 1 at number 5. Now, if we were talking the original version of the book as opposed to the revised and updated version, this might slink past the next entry, but as it stands, I know that there's like the new canon of sorts, kind of like what, you know, like what Lucas did and whatnot. You know, these people who like to go back and tinker with things and, you know, mess with the chronology and with, you know, just some of the stuff that falls into the official storytelling and whatnot. But bottom line, The Gunslinger is an amazing, just fashioning, like I said, of it's basically, it's a spaghetti western with, you know, Lord of the Rings with, I mean, obviously there's some horror elements. I mean, we don't really get to the sci-fi elements until later entries like the Wastelands and stuff. But yeah, I love this book, you know. I love the young Roland stuff, especially, you know, with him going against Court and whatnot, and, you know, using his hawk and all of that. And I mean, that is very cool. And I love just his journey through the desert and everything, you know, and, you know, pursuing the man in black and meeting this kid Jake. And I'm fascinated by just how cold and calculated and uncaring Roland is when we first meet him, you know, and the fact that he's willing to just say, screw this kid, I'm not going to help him, I'm just going to, you know, even though he's become this companion and close friend of mine, I'm going to continue towards my goal, because my goal is more important than my friends. And that's really one of the resounding themes of his character in many ways. But we do see he softens up as the series goes on, and he becomes much less of a one-note, kind of one-dimensional character. But that's what makes, you know, his arc, I guess, that much more fascinating, is the state that we first meet him in, you know. And I love the crazy, you know, palaver where he sits down with the Man in Black and you see like the beginning of the universe and the psychedelic trip out crap. I mean, that stuff is rad status, and stuff with the slow mutants in the cave is really cool. I love the way this story is broken up, but I must say one of its detriments is the fact that it does feel like episodes as opposed to one full cohesive work, and that's because the first book was in fact released in installments in you know, the fantasy sci-fi something magazine. I forget the exact title of it, but yeah, it was basically published in magazines in chunks over the course of a number of years, and so that's why maybe it doesn't feel. It feels like, you know, one story here, one story there, one story here, one story there. It feels very episodic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not enjoyable. It just doesn't feel like one cohesive piece, I guess. But I still really love this book, and that's why it's ahead of the other ones that I mentioned there. So yeah, coming in at number 5 is book 1, The Gunslinger. Number 4 is going to be Wolves of the Kala, and this is the one that these two are kind of interchangeable for me because I really love them both, but I have reservations with the aspects of them both. Wolves of the Kala is so dope for me because I love catching back up with Callahan. Yeah, my last name is Callahan. Ooh, the birth name. Holy smokes, guys, you're learning all my secrets here. Jaime and Fuego Caliente. But yeah, Father Callahan's return, it was originally supposed to be a separate book. A separate book that was a sequel to Salem's Lot, you know, and learning what happened to him after his encounter with Barlow and whatnot. Did he turn? What transpired? And it makes up a fat chunk of this book. I think this is the third longest. I know it's another one that, like Wizard and Glass, is in the 700-something page range. And so I also love the stuff with Caliber and Sturgis, you know, where there's these wolves that come and steal, you know, one of the twins, and they go and they use them to, you know, to their own means and stuff like that. And I guess I have to say one of my biggest qualms with this book is the reveal of what the wolves actually were, and that's where, like, I love this book up until I'd say maybe the last, like, 100 pages, maybe, something like that. But we see so much more heart between the relationship with Eddie and Susanna, and we see Roland really kind of come out of his shell, you know? The scene where he's dancing and everything is so great, you know, where he's at the party when they're being welcomed like, you know, heroes, even though they haven't done anything yet, you know. These gunslingers are here to save us from the wolves, and so on and so forth. But, you know, this is also where they significantly expand on a lot of the mythology with Sombra, and we learn more about, you know, their connection and stuff. But this is also where we learn about Todash, and, you know, just, we learn about some of the plans of how they're gonna, you know, save the lot with the rose and stuff. And, you know, at first I really wasn't so hot on that particular aspect of the story, you know, with Calvin Tower and with trying to, you know, and the Balazar connection and all that stuff. But over time, I guess it's grown on me, and I'm okay with it. And it's you know, it's not that bad as a whole. But I like the training aspect in this. I'm not so sure about the throwing of the plates and all that stuff, and I'm not so sure about the changing of Susanna as things go. But there is enough interesting stuff with the Callahan segue, which is rather lengthy, I must say. And you know, just being the sequel to Wizard and Glass, which I adore so very much, I really like Wolves of the Kala, and that's why it just barely snuck past The Gunslinger. So now we get to my number 3 is probably going to be the most controversial thing I have on here, since putting the drawing of the 3 way in the back. My number 3 is The Wind Through the Keyhole. Love The Wind Through the Keyhole. Now, some people may say that's not a real Dark Tower entry, blah blah blah, it's just a story within the story within the story, and a good chunk of this book doesn't even deal with Roland. Tough titties. I love this book, seriously. And then just starting out with the Starkblasts and stuff, it's funny how they connect the story within a story within a story through the threading theme of just love for your mother and trying to do right by her. Yeah. And, you know, I love the stuff with the Skin Man, which is where basically in this Roland and Jimmy DeCurry go, they are sent, because this book, another reason why I love it so much is because it takes place during my favorite era, because you know what my 1 and 2 are going to be, which is going to be 1, which is going to be 2, but you know that with the placement of this, what my favorite era of the Dark Tower storytelling is, and it's definitely, it's like the 3-4 range. It really is, you know. I love that era of the quartet, and I also love the young Roland stuff, and this basically takes place right after book 4, This is 4.5. And so right after all the stuff in Magus, you know, that's why, you know, Jaime and Roland are sent to Debaria to go I'm trying to remember the name of the place, Serenity, yeah, that's right, where Roland's mother was as a nun at one point, and there's this skin man, this crazy shapeshifter, who's going around just tearing people limb from limb. This is probably the most horrific entry in the Dark Tower as far as like genuine horror and some of the stuff that we have described to us with this shapeshifter who can morph into any kind of animal. And so he's morphing into like, you know, like snakes and bears and all kinds of craziness and just tearing peeps limb from limb. But it's really, for me, the story within the story that resonates with me, you know, maybe the most, in the fact that there's this young boy named Tim whose father dies and his mother ends up marrying the best friend of the father, and you're trying to figure out who killed the father. And there's this dude, the Covenant Man, who's like a tax collector of sorts, but you pretty much get the vibe he's Randall Flagg under another guise. And the journey that he goes on, I love young boys going on journeys, and I said I love young boys. That's horrible, isn't it? I love when young men go on these formative and just empoweringly maturing journeys that you get in this. And the stuff with Marilyn is great, and just, you know, the fact that he's doing all of this because he's trying to save his mother from a terrible fate. It's so noble, it's so loving, and the thread of that theme, once again, like I said, along with the way they connect it with Roland and what happens with his mother at the end of Wizard in Class and everything. It's just, it's such a well thought out book by King to have all of these different correlations throughout all three of the stories and stuff. And I adore Wind Through the Keyhole, I really do. I know it's not for everybody, but for me, it works wonderfully. So let's jump into number 2. Nope, number 2. Yes, unfortunately, you're number 2. You are not going to win out. And this is another that could have at one point in time, maybe during my first read, this would have been number 1. But I've read The Dark Tower a few times now, including last year when I reread and reviewed every single book in preparation for that dog shit Dark Tower movie that made me angrier than anything imaginable. But we're not here to talk about that. We are talking about my number 2, which is The Wastelands. The Wastelands, for me, basically takes all of the stuff I felt worked in the second book and mushes it together with all the stuff I loved so much from the first book. And that's why The Wastelands is so damn good. And The Wastelands has the ending with the person who shows up without me messing stuff up. Man, it's so good. And the stuff with, man, the TikTok man, once they finally get to their destination, and I mean, to pulling Jake out of New York, and it's such a fun book. This is basically the creation of the new Katet. This is where the Union is finally solidified. They meet Oi in this, and I mean, this is basically where we get all of our little pieces in play for the rest of this story. And all the stuff in Lud and the ZZ Top music, and this is a book that is just so fun. And that scene with Gasher and where he steals Jake and they're running through the maze like undergrounds of Lud, it's such a thrilling scene, and it's stuff like that makes me really pissed off that we are not getting every Dark Tower book adapted, kind of like what they did with Harry Potter, for instance. This just pisses me off to no end that they took the approach that they did with the film. But yes, The Wastelands is tremendous, and it shows the segue into my favorite Dark Tower book. Now, before I start talking about number 1, which is book 4, Wizards and Glass, the reason I started reading The Dark Tower in the first place is because of the fact that I learned that my favorite villain of all time in any Stephen King book, not Pennywise or, Bob Gray or, whatever the hell you want to call him, my favorite villain is Randall Flagg. And that's because he has showed up in so many different Stephen King stories all over the place, from Eyes of the Dragon to The Stand to even as recent as Gwendy's Button Box, which is right over there. So when I found out that he was a central player in The Dark Tower, I was like, well, shit, I gotta read The Dark Tower then, don't I? So that was really the main inception for me even starting this big journey in the first place, was Randall Flagg. He was the inspiration. And so book 4 is where we finally just get that connection with The Stand that I was I was holding out for with reading all of these different Stephen King books and all these different entries into the tower. And yet, it's funny because when our quartet, after, you know, escaping the Wastelands, finally, you know, through Blaine and everything, oh, and I didn't even mention how great the Blaine stuff is when I was mentioning the mentioning the Wastelands, but, you know, Blaine the Mod, yeah, Blaine is a pain, but once they finally get to this alternate Topeka, Kansas, and they learn about the superflu, the captain trips and everything, and yet it's like, it's not quite The Stand, you know, and it's not quite our world, and that's something that just fascinates me so much when King does this stuff. But Wizard and Glass is so wonderful because of the fact that it's the best of both worlds for me. We get my favorite era of the modern quartet, but then we get this amazing Romeo and Juliet story between Roland and Susan Delgado, and we get young Elaine and Cuthbert, and the interplay between the three of them is so fun. And for me as a hopeless romantic, the love story that is forged between Susan and Roland is epic and awesome and tragic all in the same right, because you just don't know if things are going to work out without me spoiling anything, because, I mean, you've got these big coffin killers at this place, Magus, and the fact that Roland decides to go and get down with this chick who was, you know, promised to be like the wife to the mayor and all this stuff, and, I mean, it's such a vast and multifaceted, you know, it is a story within a story. Once again, you know, Roland is very fond of telling his stories, as you guys know, but, man, it's epic, it's lengthy, and unlike The Dark Tower, book 7, I have some people who tell me constantly they think this book is too slow, but for me, I didn't want it to end. I didn't want the stuff, even when Charlie Tree comes down, I just didn't want to see it go down. And we learn more about Thinnies, which is like the little overlapping areas between realities, and how sometimes it can just take you to an inevitable doom with crazy Lovecraftian monsters that will tear you limb from limb and stuff. It's not necessarily going to take you to, you know, the 70s New York or whatever. So I just got to say, god damn do I love Wizard and Glass. Once again, not for everybody, very similar to the response that I see from certain fans with The Wind Through the Keyhole, but I adore this book because I get young Roland and I get the modern quartet, or the second quartet, at its prime, at least in my estimation. So I have to extend a grande gracias to all of you peeps for tuning into this program. I have been Jaime and Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We did the first new in Fuegotainment in quite a while. It was an over-hour-long spoilers episode discussing, yep, you guessed it, Avengers Infinity War, myself, Cecil Laird, Andrew Mercer, and Luis Hernandez. Look forward to a new episode of Fuegotainment coming with Deadpool 2, which is hitting very soon. And if you haven't subscribed to that channel, please do. And also subscribe here to The Horror Show. We have all kinds of rad stuff besides these 2 episodes of King that I do every week. We have a monthly metal thing that I do with my band Chiron, which you can check out at Chiron Band AZ on Facebook and Reverb Nation. We do all kinds of metal horror coverage, which is dope. We also do movie reviews, convention coverage, trailer reactions, all kinds of other rad stuff here. So make sure to subscribe, like, share this video with the hashtag Hail to Stephen King, and make sure to ring that little bellio thing here on the page so that you can also get updates and notifications about any time we put up new content. At least 2 episodes a day, homies and ladies all over the globe. Yeah, we are relentless and like to consider ourselves not the best horror YouTube channel. I mean, we like to think that we are, but we're not that proud. You know, we like to consider ourselves at least the most prolific with the amount of content that we put together. So once again, I have been Fuego. All of you have been fantabulous. And until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more,